Utah has yet to even play a game as a Big 12 conference member, but that doesn't mean there's not a path for them to eventually try to leave the Big 12 conference and head to the Big 10. Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, the coaching carousel, the portal, all that and more. We've got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes joining me here to discuss a rather important clause for those of us who dive deep into the realignment landscape, as we do regularly here on the show. We see the numbers and know that it is a hot topic because it's the biggest topic. Nothing impacts a team's football future more than who you're playing against, what conference you're in, how much money you're getting, and such. Utah, unlike Colorado, did not have to sign a 99-year grant of rights with the Big 12, which keeps it ironclad so the Colorado can't go elsewhere. But Utah was not exactly at the forefront of wanting to be in the Big 12 in the first place. They made that very clear. They were forced to go once Oregon and Washington departed the Pac-12 for the Big 10, and they left with the Arizona schools to join. But Arizona, I don't think really cared. Arizona State didn't want to go to the Big 12. They're, of course, there now. And Utah also was not exactly open to going to the Big 12. So when you factor in that clause, JT, and look at what's going on over in the ACC, are those conversations that can be had?
I think they definitely are. And I think you're absolutely right when you mentioned Utah's position of wanting to stay in the Pac-12 at the time. I think that they thought that was their best opportunity for success, being set up with just getting into the college football playoff and all of those things like that. And they're still set up for an opportunity to do that now in the Big 12. But, you know, there was still a path to success, they thought, in the Pac-12. And as you highlighted, when it became apparently clear that there was not, then Utah makes their way over to the Big 12. And I think as of right now, Utah's happy to be in the Big 12 as well. I am excited for the possibility of Utah's future in the Big 12. But let's also not act like the Big 12 is the Pac-12, or not the Pac-12, excuse me, but the SEC and the Big 10. So if there was an opportunity that ever arose that would allow Utah to make their way over to one of the two power conferences, I think they'd absolutely do everything in their power to do so, just like every single college not in those two would absolutely love to do. So I think Utah, if they could make it happen, they absolutely would eventually. They did a good job getting in the Big 12. They were basically the last one to get on. You mentioned Arizona State. Like, once Arizona went, we kind of knew they were going to as well, and Utah was kind of the final one. I mean, literally 2 weeks earlier, Mark Harlan was on stage with Commissioner Koliakov at the Pac-12 Media Day talking about how strong this conference was, and then 2 weeks had passed, and now he had to go over and join the Big 12. Utah set up for success there. They can continue to build their brand, and I think eventually they want to put themselves in positions for something Kyle Whittingham himself has even talked about, super conferences. When they arrive, Utah's in a position to potentially be a part of one.
Yeah, and when Utah went into the Big 12, in my view and in the view of the betting market, they immediately became the favorite in that conference. And look, if you're talking academically and culturally, Utah is not a one-to-one fit with a lot of the schools in the Big 12. To me, Utah feels more definitely Pac-12, but ACC or Big 10. And the Big 10 is certainly the one of the Power 2 conferences that I think would make the most sense, because thus far, in all of these conversations and all these realignment moves that we have seen take place, JT, the SEC actually hasn't expanded its footprint. Right? They have been, as Washington State President Kirk Schultz described, a predatory or opportunistic member is what Paul Feinbaum phrased it as, however you want to see it. But they added Texas and Oklahoma. They were already in Texas. They had Texas A&M. What's Texas next to? Louisiana. Oh, that's right. LSU is there. And then you just keep working your way along the South. They've barely expanded. The Big 10 is the league that now goes from Rutgers to Los Angeles. that I think could be in a position to add a Florida State and a Clemson or Miami if they decide that they, number one, can get out of the ACC, number two, want to and are willing to pony up the money. I think if that move takes place, that makes Utah look at the Big Ten as, well, that's kind of where we'd like to be, because I don't think as a university they would join the Big 12 and make sure that they're exempt from this 99-year grant of rights clause that Colorado had to sign if they didn't have an eye on what could be next and what move they might need to make that's in their own best interests.
I absolutely agree. I think it was a great move by President Randall, Mark Harlan, to make sure that Utah didn't have to sign up for something that does in so many ways just, tie their future in. And grant of rights, there's things that can happen, of course. That's a really tough position for the Buffaloes to be in long term to me. And Utah, they don't have to be in that position because there is an opportunity to get out, as we discussed too. And I totally agree with you when you talk about, like, I don't see Utah in the SEC. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's Utah. It's just like all the other schools of the SEC. Like, what the heck would a Utah randomly do popping up in that? And that's if obviously super conferences and all these other things would have to happen in order for us to get to that point. But like, because of Oregon, Washington, the California schools that are all now in the Big Ten, Utah doesn't seem as crazy. Yes, it's not of the caliber of a lot of the other brands in the Big Ten, but I'll say this, they're on their way to building themselves into one. They won 2 of the last 3 Pac-12 titles and didn't even get a fair shake to go after it this past year because of the injuries. I'm not saying they for sure would have repeated, but they didn't even have a chance when their starting quarterback went down. So now you have an opportunity to go in the Big 12, and if they win it this year, that's great. And then even if they could win some post-Cam Rising, like, you're talking about a team that would have several conference championships by the time we do the next round of massive realignment. And I think that makes Utah attractive because you want teams in your conference, because college football drives all of this. Of course, it's the reason this is Locked On College Football, is because of the power that the sport of college football has. Utah's a powerhouse in college football. They've won conference championships. I know they've come up short in a bowl game or two, but the ability to beat USC and Oregon on massive stages, that means something. And this is a Utah team that even when a Cam Rising and some of the veterans go away, who's been Utah's standout quarterback, I don't think this program is going anywhere. Even when Kyle Whittingham retires, I feel like they're set up to continue to have a similar transition to like what we've seen when Urban Meyer left and Ohio State hasn't missed a beat. I know not all Ohio State fans are happy with the position that the Buckeyes are in, but they've still been a top 5 program basically. And I think that's what Utah will continue to be, a top 15 program even after Kyle Whittingham departs. So I think they're definitely putting themselves in a very strong position depending on all the realignment craziness goes. If the Big Ten wants to add a really good football program, Utah will be one of the schools that can stand up and say, hey, look at our resume. I think we're pretty attractive for the opening that you guys might potentially have.
And the other thing, too, is if Utah doesn't do that, I don't think they need to be making the move. I'm talking about them on today's show, or we are rather, because they could. Because if an opportunity presents itself to where you can strike while the iron's hot, I mean, if the Big Ten decides they want to add, Florida State, Miami, and Clemson somehow, I mean, that's a pretty radical scenario. I don't know that that's close to happening necessarily, but if they were to get those 3 and they're like, oh, we're looking for a 4, hey, Utah's over here, then Utah would have an ability to say, okay, we are going to depart. Now, I have not read all the legalese about what it would take to leave the conference, but the other side of this is that they're not a voting member of the Big 12 board, and so that's kind of the exchange that they've made. So that makes me think, that the Big 12 agreed to that even they understand Utah could maybe be a realignment target one day. But I think that Utah can be in a wait and see mode. They can stay in the Big 12, even if the Big 10 even, adds a Florida State and Clemson, for instance. I think Utah can stay in the Big 12, establish themselves as the best program there, make them the most attractive one. Certainly on the academic side of things, I think they would be the best fit in the Big 10 from any team that is in the Big 12. I don't know that there's a close second on that particular side of things, because remember, presidents vote on realignment, not athletic directors or football coaches. So I think the Utes are in a good spot, but this is something that, I've seen pop up a couple times and made me think, man, they could be the next team. Like, obviously Florida State is actively trying to get out of their conference, and that's different. But if Utah sees an opportunity, they have the ability to walk through that door. JT Wistrcill, Locked On Utes. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts as well. JT, good to have you on.
Talking as always, Spencer. A lot of great stuff there with Spencer, and we got to break down all of it in one moment. But first, want to talk to you all about one of the sponsors of our episode of Locked On Utes today in our great friends at Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs as well as Fire Stick TVs that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all the games, analysis, highlights, and more, and they keep you up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, whether that's March Madness, the MMA, MLB, and a lot more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos, all of it available at Fire TV. So go check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this one. To learn more, you can go to www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV to find out more. Also want to talk to you all about another sponsor of our episode of Locked On Utes today. It's our friends at UCCU. With UCCU, there's some exciting news. UCCU has just elevated their checking accounts by enhancing them with more benefits, more savings, and more online protections than ever before. A lot more. Paired with the most advanced and comprehensive mobile banking tools, Elevated Checking is a must-have financial product packed with lifestyle, security, and financial benefits. The lifestyle benefits alone include cell phone protection, roadside assistance, telehealth with 24/7 access to licensed health professionals with zero copay, and exclusive savings on travel, shopping, and dining. And Elevated Checking is free when you do any one of the following. Use your debit or credit card 15 times or more a month, or make a monthly direct deposit of $500 or more to maintain an average daily balance of $1,500. Otherwise, UCCU Elevated Checking is only $6 a month. Visit UCCU.com to open an Elevated Checking account online or stop by any branch to open an account. UCCU. Love where you bank. All right, diving back into all the conference realignment craziness. And yes, as Spencer and I highlighted, there is potentially a path where Utah, if the Big 12 or if the Big 10, were to want Utah, that they could potentially go over there and join them. And let's say this first. All Utah fans, we should be very happy to be in the Big 12 right now. And this is not, I think some Big 12 fans will hear this and be like, oh, Utah, JT hates the Big 12 and all this stuff. That's not at all what this is about. This is simply about staying at the forefront of the future of college football, and no two conferences are more poised for that future than the Big 10 and SEC. Any school that currently is in the Big 12 should be wanting to get into the SEC or the Big 10, whether it's super conferences, everything. There was a rumor, not a rumor, my bad. There was a thing proposed last week that the SEC and Big 10 would each get 3 automatic qualifiers to a potential 16-team college football playoff. That's what Utah and every school should want to have access to that's currently in the Big 12. And the Big 12, as good as the schools are in it, there's some really quality teams and programs in the Big 12. It's not Ohio State. It's not Michigan. It's not even the USC, Oregon, Washington, Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia, all of these recent national championship winners that are at the forefront year in and year out. Like, yes, TCU can pop up and make a run, and that's what makes this sport so fun and so exciting, but it's hard to do it constantly, and there's a reason that only the top dogs are able to do it. Even a Utah that's trying to become the best version of themselves and becoming they won back-to-back conferences. That's a great achievement, but look, the Big 10 and the SEC are where the best teams are at, and it's just harder to do it in a conference like that than it would have been for Utah had they done it what they did in the Pac-12. I've seen, yes, they beat USC and Oregon, but having to go through Ohio State, Michigan, and all that is just, there's a reason that those programs have been doing it forever rather than Utah just doing it for the past 2 of the last 3 years now. So it's just a totally different world out there in college athletics right now. You want to be, with conferences changing constantly, schools being added and everything, you want to be in the best position for the future. You want to be, if there's a super conference that's only going to have all the best teams in it, any school from the Big 12 should want to be in that because it's the highest level of competition. And they should want access to the revenue because guess what? ESPN, Fox, NBC, all the TV markets, they're going to want to have the biggest games on it that involve the biggest brands in it as well. And Utah can continue to win and put themselves in a position to do that, then that's what they should do. And they should take an opportunity in the Big Ten if it comes. So once again, this is not about the Big 12 sucks and all these things like that. It's a simple fact right now that the SEC and the Big Ten, based on what they can make, there's a reason that when all the other Pac-12 schools, or not all the other, but USC and UCLA, Oregon, Washington, they didn't say, oh, let's go to the Big 12. They said, let's go to the Big 10 because that's the best opportunity. Financially wise, they're in the strongest position, best conferences, best brands, and it'll bolster all those teams, in my opinion, being there. I think Utah was a great move for them to get in the Big 12. They're set up for success here, and there's a lot of quality programs, as I mentioned, but they're not of the caliber of the biggest dogs that I highlighted in there. It doesn't mean that Utah or any Big 12 teams, like obviously those teams could beat Nebraska. They can even upset some of the massive ones like that, but it's hard to see any of the teams in the Big 12, at least short term, crafting themselves into powerhouses that are capable of year in and year out. I'm not talking about getting the right group of players together. We see that happen in college sports a couple times. We already mentioned what TCU did in Michigan a few years ago, but it's so hard to do it like for 3 years in a row. Like Ohio State every single year is in the playoff / national championship discussion. Michigan is now like that. Alabama's like that. Like that's what we're dealing with. And you want to be in a conference with those teams because the teams that win the most, the biggest brands, are the ones that drive the biggest dollar figures. That's what this is about. This is strictly a business conversation. And as we highlighted with Spencer, there's potentially a path for Utah to do that if an opening were to come in the Big Ten. Now, Utah, obviously, from a brand standpoint right now, they wouldn't be the Big Ten's first pick. And I agree with what me and Spencer discussed, right? Like you're not going to see Utah in the SEC. I'd be shocked if that ended up being the case. I would much more expect Utah to make it in the Big Ten, especially like if we see the Big Ten evolve into some form of like the Pac-12 with a bunch of those schools in there like that, like Utah would just make a lot of sense from an addition at that standpoint. And that's where Utah just needs to continue to win and take care of business on the field if they want to ever have an opportunity to enter a conference like the Big Ten where the best play. And you got to have your brand just continue to elevate. And how you do that is by continuing to win, something Utah's already done a good job of. They're building themselves into a stronger brand because yes, the number one thing will always be tradition, but you know what else really helps drive viewership? Like ranked games, top matchups. So if Utah is playing in a bunch of top 10 matchups because they're, or giving other, like, I don't know if all the other Big 12 teams will be, hopefully they will. On Utah's schedule this year, this was the reason it was voted one of the easiest in college football. I don't see a lot of top 10 matchups for Utah coming up, but if Utah's in the top 10, that bolsters their brand. Teams will want to add them because they're like, oh, who wouldn't want a top 15 program, right? Yes, it's never going to drive the viewership numbers that all those other ones I listed were, but it would be a very attractive game. Like when Michigan plays Rutgers, or let's say if Utah in this hypothetical was in the Big Ten, if Utah's playing Washington and both those schools are ranked inside the top 10, I think that game is a really good chance to beat out the Michigan one because as we highlighted, Michigan's just going to steamroll Rutgers. Like there's no fun in that, but there's always fun and appealing to have top teams playing each other. And that's what Utah is going to continue to mold themselves into, as they already have a top team, a top program. So once again, this is a conversation that I would expect to happen in a few years. You know, it's hard to put a timeline on any of these things. I don't think Utah is going to play 1 year in the Big 12 and then go. But if an opening came in the Big 10, then yes, Utah should absolutely take it. Just like any school in the Big 12 should take an invite they can get to the SEC in the Big 10 because they are in a stronger position, simply put. I'm excited for the Big 12. I think it's going to be a really fun conference. I hope that we see some of these teams break through and make an impact like that. But yes, I do believe all of them, if given the chance, would want to go to the Big 10 because of their resources, the financial aspect. All of those things have to matter, and they play a factor in this. They 100% do. So it will be very interesting to see how it all ends up shaking out for Utah. And I'm interested to see how the President Randall, Mark Harlan, whoever's making these decisions, if that opportunity comes, how they navigate it. Because I believe every school should be doing everything they can to try to get in what I eventually believe will be the two super conferences, the SEC and the Big 10. So definitely something to keep an eye on as the crazy cycle that is college football will continue to evolve and change over the next few years. So that's going to do it for our football talk today. But I want to talk about the Utah Gymnastics team and their recent outing in which they took on the Cal Golden Bears with all of you in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you all about one of the sponsors of our episode of Locked On Utes today, in our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire, and it gives you access to the professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many qualified candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats that you just might not have time and the resources you want to hire. That's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to improve their hiring process. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses are using LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Last week, we saw the Utah Gymnastics team, the Red Rocks, in action as they took on the last week, yes, as they took on the Stanford Cardinal. And this was they took on Stanford. I apologize. They took on Stanford. Then they took on Cal. The Golden Bears ranked third, and Utah suffered a loss. It was actually drops their record now to 9-4. And look, Cal, this was a matchup between top 5 teams. Cal's a really good team as well. And we saw that play out, right? Like, if you look for Utah, the bar's performance is something for the Golden Bears. You just got to give them credit to, right? Anytime you put up a 49-725 versus Utah's 49-400, like those are just game change things. And I don't even think it's not poor by Utah, but that's where it's just give credit to them for being exceptional. And then you look, it's another one in Utah losing out on the beam, and same thing with vault, right? They have a 49-400, Utah 49-300. So we know Utah, like Miley O'Keefe, of course, continues to step up. She earned a 995 on the beam for Utah, and you got other players who stepped up too as well. But Zibri's earning a 99. Like, there's just lots of examples of individuals throughout this. We could look to floor too, right? Jaden Rucker a 99, Miley O'Keefe a 995 on the floor, but just not enough. That's where you got to give credit to the Golden Bears for being just a little better than Utah. And that's all it took for the difference in this one is the Golden Bears nabbed the 198-100 to 197-700 win. It's those narrow margins, those narrow victories. So even though Utah in the second half of the meet, right? If you look at Utah on beam, Utah has the better score, but just barely the better score, right? 49-400 to 49-425. That's where Utah's slight advantage. Floor, two teams the exact name score, 49-575. But when you lose handedly in beam by 49-725, as we mentioned, to 49-400, and then lose by 100 on vaults, like that's where just things aren't going to work out in for your favor. And that's what we saw for the Utah Gymnastics team. So a tough loss there, and they're back in action tonight. They got their matchup against Arizona, so they'll be in Tucson and inside the McHale Center. So I expect Utah to bounce back and get a win here, but be interesting to see how it works out for the Red Rocks. This is a team that is filled with so much talent, of course. So I think they'll be fine still as it relates to postseason play, but didn't come out on the right end of it last week. And now they'll return to action here. And speaking of action, they'll be back in the Huntsman Center for their tri-meet. That's going to be on March 15th, next Friday. So we'll continue to cover that, just like we continue to cover all things Utah athletics. There is a lot of stuff to break down with the Pac-12 women's tournament. The Utah Utes battling their way through that. Also talk about the men's team and some big recent outings for them and what's been going on as they are firmly on the bubble. And spring ball literally starts in less than a week. So much to continue to break down with all of you. Hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next week on Locked On Utes with spring football back.